the self is not the body, not the mind, not a collection of the body and the mind, and not separate from the body and mind.
So what is it? You said something really deep. You said something like the true nature of things was actually empty. I really like to use the Oxford Dictionary all the time just to have an idea of what people understand or what's the common definition of emptiness. And the dictionary says, empty of something without a quality that you would expect to be there. Okay, so
very good.
My minion, my despicable me minion mag is empty now, in the sense that it doesn't have any content, so it doesn't have any chi. But I guess that's not what Buddhism is talking about when they talk about emptiness. So it's also not very clear when I listen to definitions like devoid of independent existence or total interdependence. I mean, I can try to understand what that is, logically speaking, but I'm not sure if I have a grasp on that directly from experience. So maybe you can talk a bit about the notion of emptiness. How do we get there? If we can actually have a first-person experience of that, and how is that related to the idea of the self? Just to close the loop.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, so yes, what is emptiness? As you say, emptiness is one of those concepts and words which has a certain associations and understandings within our common parlance, but within its usage within Buddhism is very specific and very different from what we might ordinarily understand. It does mean the same as the Oxford definition, but it's further than that. So the Oxford definition is that it's a quality of being empty of something. And so emptiness means the absence or being empty of inherent existence. The difficulty for us is that inherent existence seems like quite a intellectual term. It's like, and things are empty of inherent existence. So what?
Exactly. So what?
We can say in another way to describe inherent existence is, and this is quite radical, but is, and this is what my teacher Geshe Kelsang uses, is the things we normally see. So therefore, the things, all things are empty of the things we normally see. Essentially, what we're saying is, say our self is empty, i.e. it lacks possession of the self that we normally see. And that is the inherently existent self. The self that we normally see is perceived to be inherently existent, to be independent, to be separate, and that self doesn't exist at all. The self does exist, but just as a mere imputation by mind, correct imputation by mind. So the true nature of the self is emptiness. As it says, this is in How to Transform Your Life by Geshe Kelsang. It says, what is emptiness? Emptiness is the way things really are. It is the way things exist as opposed to the way they appear. We naturally believe that the things we see around us, such as tables, chairs, and houses, are truly existent, because we believe that they exist in exactly the way that they appear. However, the way things appear to our senses is deceptive and completely contradictory to the way in which they actually exist. Things appear to exist from their own side without depending upon our mind. We perceive things to have their own independent, inherent existence. So we think, at the moment I'm in you could say a house, it's a flat really, and it feels like the flat has its own inherent independent existence. But that means we should be able to find the house, the flat, separate from anything that's not the house. If something inherently existed, we should be able to locate it. because that's what we perceive. Let's forget about the house. Let's think about something more important to our own experience, which is ourself, because that's the fundamental object which we're thinking about all the time. So if the self existed in the way that it appeared, then it should be findable. We feel that I have a self. You hurt me. I want this. I need this. I'm doing this. I'm good at this. We feel there is a findable self, and we don't question it. It's an innate view that believes there is a findable self. So if there is a findable self, well, let's go ahead and try and find it. And we have to say, if we cannot find this self, then we have to conclude that this self doesn't exist. It's like if you're looking for a goldfish, it's either inside the room or outside of the room. If it's not in either of the places, then there's no goldfish or whatever. We have to be clear. This is Buddhist wisdom and Buddhist logic. So we have to think, well, if this self exists, if the self that I normally see exists, then it means it must be findable. And if it's findable, then I should be able to find it either within the body and mind or separate from the body and mind. So either somehow it's within the body and mind, which means it could be part of the body and mind, it could be a collection of the body and mind, or it's separate from the body and mind. And we have to say, well, there's no other possibility, is there? It's either in the body and mind somehow or separate from the body and mind. If we search for the self, then we see clearly, well, the self is not the body, is it? It's not the body. Our body isn't a neuroscientist. Our body isn't a musician. Our body doesn't feel happy. Our body doesn't get depressed. Our body doesn't get excited. So we can say fundamentally, clearly, it's the self is not the body. We can make that distinction. Okay, the self is definitely not the body. What about the mind? Now, the mind's harder because we have this hazy view about what the mind is. We don't know what the mind is. But when we start to understand the mind a little bit more, well, okay, so the mind is that which is aware. And it's very popular to think that the mind is the self. But it's not true, because again, like we say, I will say I'm tall because relative to convention, I'm fairly tall. I will say I'm a composer. I'm a musician. Is the mind a composer? Is the mind a musician? Sure, I'm using my mind. I'm depending upon my mind. But the mind is not these things. We have to then say, okay, I am not my mind. The self that I normally see, it's not my body, it's not my mind. Okay, well, we're like, okay, I know. It's a collection. It's the body and mind together. Come on. But two things that are not the self cannot magically transform into the self. Two things which are fundamentally non-self. It's like A plus A is not B, it's 2A. It's two things which are not the self. You put together non-self, 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 a collection of non-selves. So that doesn't make sense when we investigate it properly too. The self is not a collection of the body and mind. So, okay, well, it must be separate from the body and mind. Well, then you take away the body, the body, the arms come off, everything comes off, everything disappears, the whole body disappears, the brain goes, you take away the mind, the thoughts, the feelings, the perceptions. Where is anything that you could possibly call a self? It's gone. It's gone. So clearly that fourth possibility is equally absurd. So the self is not the body, not the mind, not a collection of the body and the mind, and not separate from the body and mind.
So what is it?
Well, we have to conclude that findable self that we thought was there is not there at all. It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. Because we said if it existed, then it must be findable, and it must be findable in either the body or the mind or collection or separate from them. We've searched in those four places and we failed to find the self. So we have to conclude the self that we normally see does not exist at all. So that failure to find the self that we normally see, that is emptiness. That is emptiness. And that is the true nature of our self. Our self exists, but our self is not separate from emptiness. Emptiness means the true nature of things. And it's not a separate reality. It's not a separate reality. It's actually the way the self truly exists. And it's not just the self. Everything exists in this way. Even a chair exists in this way. It's like, well, where's the chair? Is it the back? Is it the sort of seat bit? Is it the legs and so forth? These are just parts of the chair. Is it the collection of the parts? And we say, yes, it's the collection of the parts. But the chair that we relate to is a findable real chair. In reality, there's no chair separate from the mental imputation chair on a correct basis of the parts of the chair. But the real nature of the chair is its emptiness. And this is a bit wild. This is a bit wild because we're saying that actually all the things that we normally see don't exist. Don't exist because we normally grasp at real things. Things exist, but as dependent arisings.
Yeah, I think here it would be really, really important to make a distinction between levels of existence, because I think we have mentioned 4 times we have claimed that something doesn't exist, and 3 seconds later we said that the same thing actually exists. So I think what you mean about something not existing, like the self not existing, you're actually referring to the true nature of that thing, not of the fact that there is no such thing at all at any level that we can call a self, because clearly in our daily life experience, we experience the self, right?
Sure.
We operate under the premise that there is some Andres there that operates in the world, that they can say, "Hi Henry, I'm Andres." I think one thing is that it's looking for the true nature of things, of that thing called self. And another completely different thing to me is to say that there is no self at all at any level, because that would be nihilism again. And I think you're not claiming that. That's a very common misconception. So when you through your reasoning, you end up saying, okay, there is no self at all, the self doesn't exist. To so many people that immediately means, okay, this is nihilism. There is no such thing as a self. It doesn't matter what I do, what I don't do. And I think you're not trying to say that.
Not at all. Yeah, this is the thing. This is why the middle way is very subtle. It's very subtle because we hear those teachings on Buddhist teachings on emptiness, and then we grasp at the extreme of non-existence. Mm-hmm. Oh, things don't exist then. Nothing matters. No morality, screw everything, exactly. Just do what I like or whatever.
Yeah.
But actually it's the opposite. It's actually because the self that we normally see doesn't exist. Because of this, then there is dependent relationship, and so things function. There is cause and effect. There is actually karma. And because of this, then actions have consequences and things matter, So it's worth recognizing that we can still perceive something even if it doesn't exist at all. So for example, say you come into your room and it's dark, you haven't turned on the lights, and you see a snake on the ground, and you freak out, you develop fear, you're like, what? And then you sort of run, you turn the lights on, and then you see, oh, it's a toy snake. It's this toy snake. So your friend, flatmate, whatever, put it there to scare you. So it's the toy snake. In the moment when you perceive the snake, you weren't perceiving a toy snake. You're perceiving a snake, and you had an emotional reaction on the basis of a snake. That snake did not exist at all. It didn't exist at all. And yet you had an experience. You were perceiving snake. You're perceiving a non-existent. So it's the same with the self that we normally see. The self that we normally see, the self who feels intrinsically limited, stuck, overwhelmed, separate, all the rest of it. Even the self who feels confident and happy, and all these sort of things. Even that self, is like the toy snake. We can say is like the false snake, the toy snake appearing as real. So it appears, but it doesn't exist at all. Yet we have this big emotional response and an emotional experience in relation to it.
Yes. So in that metaphor, in that sense, when you turn on the light, you see how true things are. So you see that there is actually a toy. So for an external object, I think it's much more easier to distinguish between, oh, that was not what I thought it was. Yeah. But with the self, that is something that by definition is there all the time. You cannot get out of the self to see how this self is just a toy. You cannot do that. So you cannot turn on the light just by looking at it from outside. So is there any way that you can turn that light on from a first person point of view? So how do you realize that this self is actually a toy self?
That's wonderful. That's a wonderful question and wonderful using of the analogy. Yeah, so there is a way, and you have to use the light of wisdom, the light of wisdom. Because the self is an internal object, as you say, a toy snake, that's an external object. Self is an internal object, then yes, it's sort of harder for us to look at. And because also we're so wrapped up with the self that we normally see, then it's like, it's even harder to look at, because it's for us thinking that there's no self that we normally see is like, it's just like air to us. It's just our reality, or water to a fish. It feels like that's just how it is. So this is where meditation comes in, because at the moment I can say these things and we might have some intellectual understanding. We probably will have doubt and so forth, which is wonderful actually. Because we have to go through doubt to get to wisdom. First you have to doubt something, and then you have to think. Firstly, you have a doubt tending away from the truth, but that's a good sign, because then you have the doubt tending towards the truth, thinking, well, maybe there is something in this,
Yes.
and then you look into it more. And then you start contemplating it more, and you develop what's called a correct belief. Based upon intellectual understanding, correct logical reasoning, you start to see, well, actually, that is flawless logic. That's flawless argument, I see. And you have to be very patient to do this, because a lot of people, when they hear teachings on emptiness, they think, oh, it's linguistics. It's like it's playing tricks or something like that. Well, it's not actually. But you have to be patient to see that, to understand that. And therefore you have to be humble as well. You have to, it's like, there's that classic analogy, isn't there, or story, where a student comes to a Zen master and says, Master, please teach me the profound teachings on emptiness. And the master says, let's have some tea. Let's have some tea. And so they're there with their cups of tea, and the master's pouring the tea into the student's cup, and he fills out the cup and then keeps on pouring, and it just flows out, and it's just spilling everywhere. And the student's like, the cup's full, I don't need any more tea. What are you doing? And the master says, this is like your mind. Your mind is at the moment is full of grasping at your own views and thoughts and so forth. And so if you want to experience wisdom, you firstly have to empty them. You have to let them go, And this is hard for us, because we're all attached to our views, because they define us. It's like, I believe this and this is me. It gives us some sense of validity as a person and so forth. It's part of our identity, especially if we spent a long time thinking certain things, Even though we know even in our life we've changed our views fairly significantly. But still, my view right now is correct, because this is what I think, I'm attached to it and so forth. If we're truly committed to the truth, which science, I think, by the definition of science is, if we're truly committed to the truth, then we have to be open. We have to have an open mind. We have to be able to think, maybe what I currently think is not entirely correct. We have to have that humility. That's what I like. The real essence of science and the real essence of Buddhism, because it's inner science, is humility. Is that searching that actually I think the Tibetan term for Buddhist is Nangpa, which means insider. It's like someone who's like searching on the inside, like looking the inside on the inside. And so we need that humility.
Yeah, it's like a detective of the soul.
Exactly. And then we can start to see, from our own experience, oh yeah, actually that does make sense. And so initially we have this, what's called a correct belief, but that's not enough, because it's a good start, but just knowing intellectually, oh, the self that I normally see doesn't exist, doesn't do that much. It might a little bit say like you're experiencing some problems, and then you remember, oh, those teachings, I went through the logic, that's myself doesn't exist. It might have some impact for sure. but it's not enough. You have to see it, you have to know it, because at the moment we perceive the opposite, we see the opposite. And so that's when, through meditation, you go deeper, you bring that awareness deeper from what's called a correct belief to an inferential cognizer, where through using reasons you see it, but only you infer it, but you're still inferring something that's true. A bit like if you see a house and there's fire, there's smoke coming from the chimney, you can correctly infer there's a fire in the house, there must be a fire in the house, but still you're not seeing the fire directly. But even that understanding, it has an impact on your mind, especially if it's your house.
Yes.
And similarly, if you have that understanding in relation to yourself, that direct, well, not quite direct, but that direct inference, that the self I normally see doesn't exist at all, then you're getting close. Finally, you keep on meditating. A yogi, who we say a yogi is someone who, a deep meditator, keep on meditating this until at some point, what's called the generic image of, like, let's say with the fire, you have this generic image of a fire. You can't actually see the fire, but you're perceiving the fire. Your mind's cognizing the fire as a generic image. You don't see it directly, but you've got a generic image of the fire. If you keep on meditating, it's like going into the house and seeing the fire for yourself. And so finally you have that direct perception. There's no self. There's no self. The self that I normally see does not exist at all. And what's the experience? The experience is incredible joy. Incredible joy, because then all my problems are gone. I've got no problems. I've got no problems because all my problems are on the basis of this self that I normally see, this stuck, independent, isolated self. And that self doesn't exist at all and has never existed and never will exist. So I'm free. So you see, like, these teachings are so deep and so profound, but so liberating, Even if we just were to kind of imagine that right now, imagine that the self that we normally see didn't exist. Imagine that painful self that we find ourselves caught up in so often. Imagine if that self actually wasn't true. It didn't exist at all. You have an experience of freedom. So you can say another way to call emptiness is freedom, because the experience of emptiness is freedom. It's not cold. It's not a void in a sort of negative sense. It's actually on the basis of emptiness. Because of emptiness, then all things are possible. Because of emptiness, because the self that we normally see doesn't exist at all, then we can develop universal love. We can develop universal compassion. We can benefit others. We can change too. If the self that we normally see did exist, then we could never change, because we grasp at it as intrinsically existent, and on top of that we have permanent grasping as well, thinking it's permanent and so forth. When we start to get some taste of this wisdom, recognizing the self that I normally see, it doesn't exist at all. The reality of myself is mere imputation by mind. So if I change the conditions that give rise to the appearance of self, then I will have a different self, still merely imputed, but I have that freedom to do that because there's no real self. So therefore I can change. I can become a happy person. Or let's say I can become a happier person, but finally I can become a happy person. I can become a loving person. Finally, I can become, a blissful person. The deeper we go into our own mind, when we go into the depth of our mind, our very subtle mind, we start to see, I can become a blissful person. Finally, I can become a Buddha. I can become an enlightened being, because the self that I normally see doesn't exist. I've got infinite capacity to change, to grow. And if I let go of all delusions, all mistakes, all knots within my mind, then the Buddha nature is revealed. This natural peace, clarity, joy, love, all these wonderful expansive qualities is revealed. And actually that's our true nature. That's what's waiting, in a sense, to manifest. And every living being, without exception, even the most degenerate, cruel living being, has this Buddha nature, has this potential to become a Buddha, to become fully realized.
Yeah, that's something. It took me a while to understand that if it's true that that's the true nature of ourselves, then that truth is basically holds for everyone. Even some people that you wouldn't say that are capable of having
even
that.
Donald Trump.
Yes, they have that. So they have
Yeah.
the potentiality to
Yeah.
become aware of that. And that's
Absolutely.
something...
It might be very buried, the delusions
Yeah.
might be very manifest and so forth. The, false self might be very apparent and strong, but still
But
the
still there.
potential is there. Yeah.
That's hard to swallow, but...
And that's the real nature of love. That's the real nature of love. To see beyond a person's apparent faults, apparent flaws, which may be presenting themselves even sometimes very strongly. The true nature of love sees beyond that and sees into their heart, sees into their mind, sees their Buddha nature and loves that. Because we don't want to love an alcoholic. We don't want to love a drug addict. We don't want to love a narcissist. That's stupid. You love the pure person, the pure nature, which will naturally bring that out, encourage that to manifest. And we know within our relationships, actually, that is the nature of love. It's like at one level almost overlooking the faults and so forth, because we have faith that there is a wonderful person underneath. Now, that love is only going to come and be deep on the basis of knowing it for ourselves, through our own experience, within our own mind, within our own meditation, through knowing for ourselves, actually, I have this pure nature. I have this incredible potential, this incredible peace, love, joy, clarity within my heart. If we know this directly through our own experience in meditation, which we can do easily just by getting into a habit of meditation and starting to allow our mind to be peaceful, then we can think on that basis. We can recognize, peace is natural to our mind. So we start to develop this inner confidence. And when we start to know it through our own experience, then we can know it for others. So you see, actually, therefore, that developing our own wisdom, connecting to our own Buddha nature, our own pure potential, is actually the way to connect to love, to the way to develop and deepen real love towards others.
Let's say that someone wants to start becoming aware of this emptiness nature of its own self. So how do you start? Do you start reading? Do you start practicing? Do you start, how does it work for someone who wants to initiate in this path?
We don't like to think about this in the West, but you cannot do it online and you cannot do it on your own. We think these days I can do everything through an app. I can do everything of my own searching. Truth is, we can't. It's like you can learn basic piano, on your own and through an app and so forth, but you can't become a great pianist through that. You need a teacher. And the same with driving, same with any skills. You need instruction, you need teachings. We don't like the idea of spiritual guides, gurus, teachers in the West, because we've got this pride and also because we've been let down so many times by people. We don't trust people.
Yeah.
We don't trust teachers.
We have the example of the Catholic Church, which is not a very good one.
Sure, yeah. Indeed. And so it's fair enough. We have this quality of distrust. I mean, it's good in its way because it means we don't accept just surface things. We want to look deeper. We want to check that things are good. But so we have to find a meditation teacher, essentially a guide, someone to help us, and someone who's giving the framework. Because the truth is, although emptiness is true and everyone can experience emptiness, at the moment our mind does not have the capacity to directly realize emptiness because we don't have the framework in place. Firstly, you have to realizing emptiness depends upon having deep concentration. Concentration is again a word we don't like, but essentially deep stillness, peace and clarity within the mind, where we're able to look really clearly. We know we sit down to meditate, our mind is thinking about so many things. So we think about emptiness and we think about emptiness as a subtle object. So we need a very still mind to meditate on emptiness, to perceive it clearly, to understand it clearly. But even that concentration, that stillness of mind, in Buddhism we call it tranquil abiding, that concentration depends upon what we call moral discipline. It depends upon basically living our life in a kind-hearted way, in a disciplined, kind-hearted way. Because again, everybody knows that when we lack any quality of discipline within a life, again, it's a word that we don't like unless we're into it. If we lack this discipline, then our mind is all over the place. I mean, the fundamental discipline is moral discipline of not killing, not stealing, not lying, not committing sexual misconduct, not engaging in hurtful speech, divisive speech, covetousness, these sort of things. This is fundamental moral discipline. And obviously, probably, hopefully, we don't kill anyone at the moment. But how often do we slightly lie? How often do we slightly say something without a good intention? Slightly because we're angry, we're peed off. We're hurtful speech. These things. How often do we, in our job, are we doing it for purely selfish purposes? We're doing it to kind of fulfill some selfish intentions. These things create a basis of lack of peace within our own mind, a basis of disturbance within our own mind, in our own experience, and which means we have no basis of concentration, no basis of peace and stillness, and therefore no basis of wisdom to understand emptiness. And so actually these are called what Buddha called the 3 higher trainings. On the basis of what Buddha called renunciation, which is the wish to attain real happiness, the wish to be free from all suffering permanently, then on that basis we practice higher moral discipline. So moral discipline motivated by this pure intention of renunciation, higher moral discipline, higher concentration, and higher wisdom. And so we need all of this. But again, you can see we're not going to be able to establish these things and develop these realizations on our own. We need help, and we need the 3 jewels. We need Buddha, we need Dharma, we need Sangha. Sangha is the community of practitioners. So we need other people to bounce ideas off, to kind of be inspired by. That's why, say, my teacher Geshe Kelsang, specifically, apart from writing his books, which are incredible, he specifically has set up Kadampa centers across the world now. I think there are hundreds of them across the world now, for people to get together and discuss these things and receive teachings and meditate and share experience and so forth. Because on our own, we're never going to make it. And I can say from my own experience, I've been familiar with these teachings for over 10 years now. It's sort of it's like 12 years almost, and the thing which has kept me going and sustained me is having that community, actually having friends who are trying to look at their own minds, who are practicing, who are working on themselves, and so on and so forth. That's what sustains us. We have to be inspired. We have to share that inspiration. We have to have that network, as it were, and it's a wonderful thing. It's like if you're doing anything, like if you're trying to develop an amazing body, then you have to have kind of a network of, even if it's on social media, but better if it's in person, a network of sort of gym goers, people who are doing that sort of thing, and we've absolutely need it within our spiritual life, within our inner life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we could be talking here forever, but I think for the sake of time, we can do this again. I would love to do this again with more inquisitive questions for you.
Please.
So I think for those who want to stay in touch either with you or they want more information about how to start, I think you can provide some kind of link or some kind of...
Absolutely.
And that would be great. So thank you very much.
Such a pleasure and an honor.
For having this conversation.
I
hope we can do it again soon. And everything that we mentioned here, we're gonna basically post it on the channel.
Wonderful.
Yes. Thank you very much, Henry.
Thank you so much, my friend.